Hey, good evening, everybody. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of StudentLoanJustice.org. It's me, Ed McKinley, up here around the Boston area. Whoops. Hang on a minute. Okay, I'm back. So this is the Thursday night live stream that I do usually on Thursday nights, and I got good news tonight. I got some stuff going on tonight that I'm excited with, and the fight is, you can tell, is raging on. And there's something I want to talk about tonight that I hope people can wrap their minds around: the enormity of something that happened this week, something that is very much aligned with what Alan Collins and the rest of our ragged band of operatives here have been fighting for quite a few years, has taken a a quantum leap forward towards a very real possibility of fruition. And look, if you've been doing this as long as I have, in particular as long as Alan has, and if you have an understanding of who we are, what we're about, and what we've been doing, then I hope you have a real appreciation for. If you haven't already seen it on our Facebook page in the postings, then I'll say it again tonight. Our our bill to restore bankruptcy protection, which has been sitting in committee in the House of Representatives in Congress for most of this legislative term, has done something no other bill that we have introduced to restore these absolutely essential protections has ever done. And it's huge. Now, just, to put a little context on this, and I hope people will forgive me for kind of fudging with numbers here a little bit. They're not intended to deceive anybody. I just didn't have time to look up the actual numbers, so I'm going to be throwing out what I think are reasonable representations of the proportion to just sort of give you some idea of how important this is. Now, you may or may not know this. The majority of bills that go into the legislature are introduced by legislators, that i.e. your congressmen and or your senators. But, the truth of the matter is that virtually any citizen in the country can actually author and introduce legislation into the legislature. I don't know how often that happens. I don't know how many individuals or private groups sponsor and or co-sponsor. Usually you do have to, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's okay. I think you do ultimately need to find a legislator, or it's best to find a legislator to co-introduce the bill into the legislature. Now, getting a bill, so my point is, getting a bill into the legislature in and of itself is not exactly a miracle. I don't know how many thousands and thousands of bills that are introduced into Congress every year that no one ever hears anything about, and oftentimes likely never will. And really, this kind of speaks to the point of the value of what I'm going to share with you. For our purposes, while arguably we could have introduced legislation through our own efforts probably a long time ago, the obvious value was for us to get enough legislators invested in our cause to be the primary introductees of legislation. And in the last two sessions of Congress, possibly three, I'm not absolutely certain, but I know for certain too, we have had comprehensive legislation specifically geared towards restoring bankruptcy protections to all student loans, all federally guaranteed. Well, no, all student loans, private and federally guaranteed. And up until the last legislative session, we have taken it a step further where we have had that legislation introduced into the House of Representatives by a bipartisan uh, cooperation between, I think this year was Jerry Nadler, the Speaker, Jerry Nadler, the Chairman of the Judiciary Committee, and John Katko, a Republican congressman from the state of New York. Now, I live here in Massachusetts, and up here in the Northeast, many of you may realize, and especially in Massachusetts, it's pretty dominated by liberal Democrat politics. We have strong exceptions and notable exceptions. But most of the people that I've had to work with have been, caucusing with the Democratic Party, who have shown at least some willingness to engage over the last few years in publicly denouncing some of the ramifications of student loan debt. Some have been willing to co-sponsor our legislation, which we have another bill, similar bill in the Senate, which does the same thing. It restores bankruptcy protections to all student loans. Now, look, folks, this could be a little bit confusing because for the last few months, for a lot of reasons that I think are very good reasons, we've been pushing our petition and engaging activities based around that petition, really looking for full cancellation at this point. And we're not pivoting away from that. So I hope people understand that we have not just suddenly, made this giant leap and pivot over to full cancellation of loans, which at this point, I think it's very fair to say we would agree with anybody that this thing has gotten so completely, disturbingly out of hand that just restoring bankruptcy protections may even cause more problems than it will solve for the government. When we first started student loan justice in our activities, our activism, that was the golden goose. All of the removed consumer protections were in our sights. But the real golden goose is restoring the bankruptcy protections which we believe were guaranteed in the first place by the Constitution of the United States, and has been possibly the linchpin in this system that would give us the most leverage in disabling a very predatory and corrupt system, leveling the playing field, and allowing enough people to be able to go back to the table and negotiate fair and equitable settlements of their loans. In a nutshell, that was kind of our original intention, and we believed firmly then, as we do now, looking back, that not only would that have likely been the most effective form of relief for thousands, if not millions, of people who are underwater with this debt, but for the other taxpayers who were not directly impacted under the weight of their own debt, would very, very likely be the most painless way for the government to extract itself from a Frankenstein monster that it itself was very much involved in creating. So, what am I rambling about? Well, it was a big deal a number of years ago when we began to find representatives who were willing to introduce this kind of legislation. It was an even bigger deal when we began to have some of the senators, presidential candidates, folks with a large audience begin to agree with us about bankruptcy protections, and take it a step further at this point to begin talking about cancellation of large portions of student loan debt. Now, what happened yesterday, if you are not already aware of this, and you should be, is that the Judiciary Committee, I believe it was the Judiciary Committee, I hope I'm right on that, I think I am, where our bill, 2468, for restoration of bankruptcy protections for all student loans, was actually acted upon. Let me repeat that for myself. The bill that was filed in this legislative session to the House of Representatives for the express purpose of restoring full bankruptcy protections to all student loans has been acted upon within the Judiciary Committee. If you don't know what that means, I'm going to tell you. It means that it was debated, discussed, voted upon, and passed by, I believe it was a margin of 19-5, primarily partisan in terms of, I don't know, I'm not sure that we had any Republicans in that committee that voted for passing the bill on. But be that as it may, we have had at least one rising star in the Republican Party, Representative Getz from Florida, who has spoken out quite vocally in support of this bill, and John Katko, of course, who was one of the originators of the bill. So I bring that up because it's really important that even when I'm here in Massachusetts talking to Democrats who may seemingly be willing to support our cause, one of the biggest cop-outs has always been, well, we would love to do that. We so totally agree with what you people are doing, and yes, bankruptcy protections and blah, blah, blah should all be done. But those darn Republicans, they just won't agree with anything that we want to do. And, unfortunately, to some degree, that has been kind of true. We've had a very hard time getting any significant numbers of Republican representatives to publicly back our play. This is an incredibly important development because let me tell you the second thing that being voted out of committee means. This will now go to the floor of the entire body of the House of Representatives for a vote, most likely. Possibly before the election, but most importantly before the end of this legislative session. That is an accomplishment, the proportion and size of which I don't have the words to express how big that is, and I don't have the words to express the gratitude that I have for Alan Collins and many, many people over the years who have contributed tremendous amounts of their time and other resources and stuck with this fight. This fight has obviously been a longer fight than we ever had imagined, certainly a more difficult fight than we ever had hoped for, but we're not backing off our position of full cancellation where we're at this time, which is something else with a lot of exciting news attached to it. But regardless of whether we push through executive order to cancel all of our federal student loan debt, we got to remember we've got maybe 15% of the people here, which may not sound like a lot, but when you're talking about $1.5, $1.7 trillion, it's a huge amount of money. With private loans, who we are not prone to believing they can be relieved by executive privilege. So this idea of restoring bankruptcy protection to student loans is extremely important. It is not fair in any way, shape, or form for us to leave our colleagues and cohorts here with private debts butts hanging out. And if we are successful, and we are having some success moving the ball towards cancellation of student loan debt, I think that now you're going to see the true power of bankruptcy protections in play. The other thing is bankruptcy protections being an option without cancellation of debts could cause a scurry of qualified and deserving borrowers to bankruptcy courts in numbers never seen before. The cost incurred if we are going to go that route to the taxpayer in general, the strain upon the courts and other relative complications aren't good. We don't want them. We don't want to see them. But look, if we can establish a return of bankruptcy protections even before the cancellation comes through, there's a really good chance that that could help push the cancellation over the edge. Because, look, let's face it, folks, more than half of the people who borrowed money to go to college through the government or through other private means have absolutely no reasonable opportunity or expectation to be able to ever fully retire that debt. And as if you're here, if you're in this group, if you're listening to me, you already know that. You've already been in the gauntlet, and probably, I don't need to spend a lot of time describing to you the varying challenges that it's brought up. So this is huge, absolutely huge. For our bill, something that, this wasn't even talked about 6 years ago, 3 legislative sessions ago, it would have been a suicide mission for any legislator to even bring this bill in for presentation. And now, some of the most influential lawmakers in our country have taken it up in committee and put it out where it will need to be faced by the entire body of the House of Representatives. Yes, that would still leave the Senate. We have a companion bill in the Senate. I'm not entirely certain how this works, whether those two bills come together or whether the bill being passed in the House goes to the Senate for reconciliation. I'm a little unclear on that. But I do think that it should go without saying at this point that we have some work to do with the United States Senate if we want to have any reasonable expectation of actually passing this into law prior to the election or close to. And that means putting as much heat as we can on key Republican senators. And a lot of you live in states with Republican senators who, frankly, I'm not aware of any that have openly come on board yet supporting our cause. This gives you something very valuable tool to work with. When you approach the Republican senators in your state and say, hey, look at what these guys are doing, are you going to turn your back on your conservative values and get beaten to the punch? They don't like to hear that, folks, but that's the reality of what they would be doing. And you need to remind them. They need to know. Voters in their states are watching what they do. That a decision on their part not to act favorably on this could very, very likely have an impact on what the legislature is going to look like in January of 2021. This is a very, very powerful tool. When you're calling the staff at your senator's office in your state and saying, hey, you may not realize this, but a bipartisan introduced bill has now come out of committee in the House of Representatives and will be put to a vote, should be put to a vote on the floor to restore bankruptcy protections, and you need to wake up and get on board with this or suffer the likely consequences. We're perhaps the most powerful and possibly amongst the most feared potentially groups, silent minorities, so to speak, although there are as many as 50 million of us. They don't want to wake us up. And, this kind of thing is something that gives you a lot of opportunity and a lot of help recruiting new members, bringing people in, letting them know, hey, look, this is not a hopeless fight. We are moving the ball, and we have tangible evidence to prove it. Now, because I am almost out of time, I do want to quickly go back to the petition. The petition is driving almost everything we are doing right now. And we are having probably a higher level of valued successes right now in bunches than we've had in a while. We have surpassed the 700,000 signature mark. We seem to go in fits and starts. The last 100,000 came in practically a 24-hour period. So I want to remind those of you who are out there sharing the URL to our petition, whatever you're doing, keep doing it because it worked. It's working. and we are getting attention. We are getting people's attention. There are too many elected officials in Washington who are live in more fear than you appear to realize of us becoming a cohesive, uh, directed mass of voters who are very pissed off and very motivated. So, any indication that we give to our elected officials that we are engaging in an organized effort and a cohesive effort and an effort involving enough people to impact outcomes of elections in their states and in the country, folks, we're giving you all the ammunition we can. If you can't work with what we've put out here up to date, and I'm only talking about a couple of issues right now, if you watch these live streams regularly, if you check in on the posts that we make on the Facebook page, you should be somewhat up to date on most of it. I could go on, I would be here all night with other recent developments that we cannot be ignored by the people who are in charge of creating the legislation and the policies that have put us in this hole. This is no joke. If you're a politician right now going into this election cycle, a senator, congressman, or vying for the big chair in the White House, and you begin to get a sense that a particular issue is uniting enough registered voters, potentially into the tens of millions, it gets your attention. And we need to let them know that. We need to make sure they know that we're here, we're organizing, we're pissed, we're passionate, we're fighting back. And we're going to keep fighting back until everything we've set out to accomplish is done. So a little over time that I wanted to be here. As always, once I get talking about student loans, sometimes I tend to ramble a little bit. Sorry about that. But I hope you can take some really important messages out of what I shared here tonight. One more time I want to say it because I waited a long time to say this. A bill with the intention of restoring full bankruptcy protections to all student loans that was introduced in this legislative session by a Republican and a Democratic congressperson has actually been acted on in committee and passed overwhelmingly to be introduced to the floor of the House of Representatives for a vote. That is a huge sign of progress, and I think folks out there, if you want to tip your cap to Alan Collins, he's our guy, he's our boots on the ground, he is our infrastructure, and there's a lot of ways you can tip your cap. One is just say, hey Alan, thanks for all the work you do. The other right now is if you can send them a few bucks. We also have the information for that on the Facebook page. We don't need a lot of money from a few people. We're hoping to get a little bit of money from a lot of people to keep our operating expenses, which are shockingly low, but necessary to keep the lights on here. So everybody out there dealing with all the other craziness going on out in the world right now. This is one thing, one big rock sitting on all of our chests that we do have the power to remove, and we have the power to do it soon. There are an awful lot of other big issues out there, as if not maybe even more important than this is. But this is the one that is becoming the closest to being ripe enough to harvest. This is the one that will have one of the largest impacts singularly on each of the people here. So please try not to get too distracted by political theater, for which there is a great deal taking place right now. Try to stay with us here on the substantive issues of what we're doing. We are much closer than you think. The difference between us and reaching the top of the mountain here is how many of us over the next 3 to 4 weeks are willing to step off the bench, out onto the floor, raise our hands and raise our voices, and make it clear that we are not asking for, we're not begging for, we are demanding for fair and equitable protection of our right of pursuit of happiness. So that's it for me. I'm Ed McKinley. I live up in the Boston area, and I come out here a couple nights a week for some reason or another, mostly to try and give Alan a night off, and hopefully inform, educate, and inspire a few of the people that are here tonight. I know a lot of people watch the broadcast live, but I know also a lot of you watch throughout the evening the recording. So, like I said, if you're here and you're watching this, then you already know why we're here, and you already know what we're doing. It's important for you to know what we are accomplishing, because it's really big. And, every single person here has something to contribute that will get us just a little bit or a lot closer to our goal. So thanks, everybody. Stay safe, and I'll see you again soon.